Okay, hello everyone. Um, this is the fifth session for the challenge task for Veriff. I did some ideas in the previous one, and for this one, I basically merged all of them together. I did offline, but I'm gonna just summarize what I did. I created some ideas for this. Um, the first one is this one. Um, API interface selection, because there are like two 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 interfaces, API interfaces that FastAPI supports. One is REST, another is SQL. And here I put the pros and cons. Well, the decision was basically that the solution is well, the criteria is emphasized on performance. Even though GraphQL can be better performance over fetching and fetching, but it depends on the use case, and we don't have just more than one use case. For this particular thing, I decided just basically to use the one that is by default, which is the REST, because using GraphQL requires to add a new package and it's a little bit cumbersome. It's really good, but still, testing, it's a little bit cumbersome. So the next one is CI/CD. For the CI/CD, I evaluated three: Git Actions, GitLab, CI/CD, and Jenkins. And because in the requirements I need to use pass a GitHub repository, basically I decided to use GitHub. I think it's GitHub Actions. I think it's the easiest one. For the testing framework, there is like an integration. It's it have like three. So PyTest, unit test, and FastAPI test client. There is one section for testing, which is this one here. This is the documentation. The test client is just basically an utility. It's not actually a testing framework, although it uses this kind of like assert, which is built into Python. What it basically mentions here is using PyTest. I do prefer personally to use PyTest as a unit test. It's more Pythonic the way that the tests are used, but either unit test or PyTest, both are okay. The only thing is that with unit test you don't need to have to add an external package. For PyTest, no problem. And the next one is gonna be what was the web service selection. I was wanting to increase the size, make one. There are like three options that mentioned in the documentation. One is Unicode, Hypercore, and Unicode. So there is no too much difference between Unicode and Unicode. The only thing is that Unicode requires a little bit more adaptations than Unicorn. Unicorn is just very, very, very well integrated with FastAPI and is recommended shown in the documentation. The architecture design, I think that I need to write this ADR because I decided to use FastAPI, and FastAPI is not an opinionated framework. It gives some kind of guidelines, but actually doesn't enforce you a particular architecture. Like for example, Django is for you to use this MVC pattern. So I basically evaluate the three options. Three options using, well, four, I think, four. Using the evaluation criteria. MVC, really cool, but at the end, for complex applications, it's very simple to write code in MVC, but at the end, you make some kind of like spaghetti code and some kind of like monolithic approach. Event-driven is cool if the nature of the data is async, and you want to decouple services, but increases, especially communication, have to have some kind of like monitoring for an observability for what's going on in the system. So if the system doesn't reply as you were expecting, as the other system is expecting to do, what should we do? The domain-driven design, this is really cool when you have a deep knowledge of the domain. One of the things is that I only have experienced one project using domain-driven design, and was really big. So it was created something called like ubiquitous language. So technical and non-technical people decided particular terms and concepts, and then build this kind of language on top of it, basically interactions between them. And then hexagonal pattern. This is some kind of like mix, in my opinion, between the domain and the MVC. This defines some kind of like separation of actors between users and users usually is on the top. The framework, basically the database is all the system. It's on the bottom. And enforces some particular rules about visibility and dependency injection. It's easier to test because you can test on isolation. It's easier than MVC. It can be good at extension because everything is just encapsulated. So at the beginning it requires a little bit of ramp up because the projects I'm seeing the hexagonal was implemented in like different ways. But once you are on track, then everything is just normal. I require sometimes abstraction layers that it may not be required and be a little bit of overbound for some people. Cool. So let's move on to the latest one. Because of the requirements, the customer can upload images to the session up to 5 per second per session. It means that we need to storage, or we need to handle these files. These files can be stored, or it cannot be stored. It can be stored in the local file system, cloud storage, and the database, which is a mix between cache and database. In-memory cache as well, no storage on external CDN or external CDN because of images, but it could be like any kind of like a storage, not related to the cloud one. So blah 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 blah. But I decided that since the requirements didn't mention to store any kind of data, I decided for the first iteration to use not storage. So it means that we have to the application have to handle to delete the file when the encoding is calculated. That's it. So on top of that, because the requirement says like you need to be Dockerized, I didn't make I didn't make evaluation about different containerization technologies. In fact, I only use Docker, but I know that there are at least two more. But I'm not gonna do it in the cloud because it creates some complexity that if I can handle on the Docker, I will do it in the Docker. So I created this Docker file. Maybe when I use it later, maybe we will need it, or we modified. I suppose in port 80. Then I created this Docker Compose if we want to run it locally. In fact, I want to put like 800 and the Docker file exposing the 8,000, sorry, not 800, 8,000. Cool. Because Docker file it would map the 8,000 to 81. So I'm gonna put the encoding service into 2001. And the last one, well, I added that get ignore in order not to upload everything, like idea things or GitHub things, just to minimize risk. Finally, the last thing is to add a testing container dependency, because we have the dependency of the encoding service. Then in order to run a task, we have to spin up this Docker image, have a running Docker container. In order to do that, using PyTest, I imported I added a library called test containers and do IDR for that, but it's either test containers or Docker, and test containers solve, like it's easier to use. And this is a feature that can be used in the test. I put it in the conf test. Maybe I have to modify the poetry DOM in order to use PyTest. That's it. That's everything that I done for this. So for the next session, I'm gonna start adding tests and then implementing little by little, starting with the adapters, then the ports, then the domain, using this kind of approach of TDD, test-driven development, kind of, because I'm not sometimes like 100% purist of it, but green, yellow refactor, green, yellow refactor, but yeah, let's see how it goes. So thank you very much. Yeah, the next session is gonna be coding instead of adding ADRs and configuration file that I did for this one. Thank you very much. See you next time.